Snow lashes across Ashton Falls. In a half-lit warehouse on the edge of town, a 5-year-old boy clutches his newborn sister, his tiny frame shaking against the cold concrete floor. Beside him, a German shepherd bristles, amber eyes fixed on the scarred man who has returned to silence the only witnesses to his crime. Outside, a weary police officer pushes through the storm, following paw prints and fragments of truth, unaware that every second is closing the distance between rescue and ruin. A broken locket, a child's whisper, and the loyalty of a dog will decide who survives this night. Ashton Falls was the kind of town where winter took hold and refused to leave. The mountains ringed the valley like cold stone sentinels, their slopes heavy with pine and ice. That night, the storm thickened, turning street lamps into hazy orbs. Down a back alley near Alvarez's general store, a boy no taller than the trash bins clutched a bundle to his chest. His name was Caleb, only 5 years old. His light brown hair matted with frost, his small face red and cracked from wind. The bundle was his baby sister, Leia, no more than a few months old, her tiny breath shallow against his collar. At Caleb's side paced a German shepherd, Rex, 6 years old, strong and broad-backed, his sable coat crusted with snow. A notch cut into one ear and faint scars along his paw marked him as a survivor. He circled, then returned to Caleb's side, ears angled forward, eyes sharp. Each time the boy stumbled, Rex brushed against him, steadying him without a sound. Caleb stopped beside a dumpster and pulled a crumpled grocery bag from the snow. Inside were scraps, a bruised apple, a piece of bread hard as stone. He broke the crust with his teeth, chewed it soft, then pressed a tiny piece against Leia's lips. She shifted, her mouth weakly closing around it. He tore another bit for Rex, who took it gently, his dark eyes never leaving the boy's face. Then Rex froze, body tense, ears forward. A beam of light cut through the falling snow. A man stepped into view, tall and broad-shouldered in a police parka. This was Officer Mason Clark, a local patrolman in his mid-40s. His face was weathered, defined by sharp cheekbones and a square jaw. Early gray streaked through his cropped dark hair. His hazel eyes were steady, though behind them lived a weight he carried quietly, the memory of a daughter lost in a car accident 3 winters ago. Mason stopped when Rex growled low in his throat. He crouched slightly, showing open palms. "Easy there, partner. I'm not here to hurt anyone." His flashlight dropped lower. Rex stepped forward, muscles rigid, shielding them. Mason studied the dog first, recognizing in Rex the authority of a guardian. "Good boy. You're doing your job. Let me do mine." Slowly, Mason pulled off one glove and drew a disposable heat pack from his pocket. He cracked it with his hands, warmth blooming into the frozen air. He slid it forward across the snow. "This is for the baby. You keep holding her. I won't touch her. Just place this where it can help." Caleb's lips parted, but no sound came. His eyes darted from the heat pack to Mason's face, then to Rex. The dog sniffed the air, glanced at Caleb, and lowered his head. Caleb swallowed and finally nodded. He tucked the warm pouch under his jacket, close to Leia's body. "What's her name?" Mason asked, still crouched. "Leia," Caleb whispered. "And you must be Caleb." The boy's chin lifted in weary surprise. "Someone's been looking out for you," Mason said, glancing at Rex. "He yours?" Caleb hesitated. He stayed. Mason's gaze softened. He understood. Staying meant loyalty. Staying meant survival. He straightened slowly, speaking into his radio. "Clark at Depot Alley, West Side. Infant and child conscious. Need blankets, heater, EMT check." He lowered his voice again. "I've got a cruiser around the corner. Warm seats, hot water. You can keep your sister in your arms. Your dog comes, too." Caleb looked at Rex, who leaned against his leg, steady as stone. Leia shifted under his jacket, her breath still shallow but less sharp. Caleb's jaw trembled, then set. He gave one small nod. Mason didn't smile. He only opened his stance and stepped back first, giving space. Caleb rose, awkward with the bundle. Rex moved to his flank, alert, silent, guiding. Together, they followed Mason toward the street. At the corner, Mason opened the rear door of his cruiser. He turned, steady eyes on the boy. "You're safe now." Caleb shifted Leia higher, stepped forward, and crossed the last distance. Rex pressed close at his side. The door closed behind them, and the storm outside howled on, unaware that within the cruiser, warmth had found them at last. By the time they reached the police station, Caleb's eyelids were heavy with exhaustion, but his grip on Leia never loosened. The entrance buzzed open and Mason gestured gently. "It's warm." Caleb hesitated until Rex jumped down first, shook the snow from his coat, and waited. Only then did Caleb climb out. The front desk officer, Sergeant Bill Anders, looked up from his paperwork. He was in his early 50s, his uniform collar worn from years of duty. His gaze sharpened as he saw the bundle and the small boy's wary stance. Mason's tone was firm. "Get an EMT call in. Infant and minor." A few minutes later, Hannah Reed stepped in carrying a worn leather satchel. She was a volunteer nurse in her late 20s, petite with long auburn hair tied into a loose braid. Her face was pale but framed by kind hazel eyes. Hannah had grown up in foster homes, and though her smile was quiet, it carried a warmth that came from knowing what loneliness felt like. She knelt immediately before Caleb, lowering herself to his level. "Hi, I'm Hannah. May I take a quick look at your sister just to make sure she's breathing strong?" Her voice carried no edge, only patient steadiness. Caleb tightened his arms instinctively. Rex stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Caleb and Hannah. Hannah did not flinch. Instead, she shifted so Rex could sniff the back of her hand. "You're protecting them. That's good. I only want to help." After a tense moment, Rex exhaled and lowered his head. Caleb studied Hannah's face and seemed to decide she didn't look like the people who had slammed doors in his past. Slowly, he loosened the jacket just enough for Hannah to peer inside. Hannah's gaze flicked to the heat pack Mason had tucked earlier, then back to the infant's chest, rising and falling. Relief softened her shoulders. "She's cold, but she's holding steady. We'll need warm formula soon, but she's strong." She looked at Caleb. "You did well keeping her safe." The boy said nothing, but his lower lip quivered. He buried his cheek against Leia's head. As Hannah gently examined Caleb's arms, she noticed bruises along his wrist. She asked carefully, "Did you fall?" Caleb's eyes darted down. "He fell," he said quickly, pointing at Rex. Hannah let it pass. "It must have hurt. You're brave." She pulled a peppermint from her satchel. "For later, if you want." Caleb stared at it, then slipped it into his pocket without a word. Anders returned. "Paramedic on the way. Should be 10 minutes. He paused. "Kid can sit in my chair if he wants." Caleb did not move, so Rex trotted forward, sniffed the chair, then curled at its base. Only then did Caleb sit, balancing Leia carefully. When the paramedics left, Mason returned to the boy. "You're safe here tonight. We'll find you a warm bed. You, your sister, and your dog." Caleb blinked at him as if waiting for the lie hidden in the words. Mason met his gaze without wavering. "I promise." The clock ticked past midnight. Caleb leaned his head against the back of the chair, still clutching Leia, his eyes heavy with fatigue but no longer frantic. Rex rested his chin on the boy's boot. Hannah settled nearby, watching over them with quiet patience. For tonight, the children were not in the alley anymore. The storm had eased by morning. Mason had been at his desk since dawn, trying to thread meaning out of thin strands. He couldn't shake the unease that the children hadn't simply been abandoned. The bruises on Caleb's body, the guarded look in his eyes, it all pointed to something more. He stared at a small battered photograph Anders had found in Caleb's pocket. It showed a man and a woman standing before a warehouse, both in work clothes. Mason tapped it with his finger. "Who were you? And what did you get yourselves into?" Anders pulled his coat on. "I'll head out to Alvarez's store. See if anyone spotted the kids earlier in the week." Later that morning, Hannah returned carrying formula and soft rolls. She knelt again by Caleb, who had stirred awake. "Breakfast. For you and your sister. Rex can have the crust." Caleb rubbed his eyes, then slowly reached out. While Caleb ate, Mason crouched beside him, showing the torn photograph. "Do you know them?" Caleb stared at the picture a long time. Instead of speaking, he pulled a stubby pencil from his pocket and began to scratch lines across a scrap of paper. Slowly, an image formed: a tall man with broad shoulders, a scar across his cheek, standing near a boxy building. Caleb pressed hard enough to nearly rip the paper. Then he slid it toward Mason without speaking. Mason studied the sketch, his jaw tightening. A scarred man near a warehouse. He glanced at Hannah, whose face hardened. Mason slipped the drawing into his file. "You did good." By afternoon, Mason stepped out into the brittle sunlight and made his way to the old industrial quarter where several warehouses stood abandoned. He found Walter Briggs, the old night guard, leaning against a rusted fence smoking a cigarette. Walter was in his late 60s, tall but stooped, his beard a tangle of white and gray. Years ago, he had lost his son to an overdose. Mason showed him the photograph. "Recognize them?" Walter squinted. "Yeah, they worked here before the place shut down. Kept to themselves. Decent folk, but they saw things they shouldn't have. There were shipments at night, not legal ones. They spoke up to the wrong people. Then vanished." "You remember anyone specific? Someone with a scar?" Walter nodded slowly. "One of the runners. Big man. Ugly temper. Scar down his cheek like lightning. Name might have been Doyle. Haven't seen him in years, but some say he drifts back when money's to be made." The name lodged in Mason's mind like a splinter. He thanked Walter, then stood watching the snow drift across the yard. The warehouse loomed, its windows broken. Back at the station, Caleb sat by the heater. Hannah crouched close, reading softly from a children's book. The boy leaned in to listen, his hand resting against Rex's back. For the first time, his eyes seemed less guarded. That night, Mason stood at the window, staring at the faint glow of the warehouse district. Somewhere out there, Doyle's shadow lingered, and with it the truth of what had happened to Caleb and Leia's parents. The following day, Mason walked the streets around the warehouse district again. He passed the diner where Mrs. Clara Jenkins stepped out carrying pastries. She was mid-40s, a broad-shouldered woman with curly dark hair. "Heard you brought kids in last night." Words fast. She handed him a pastry. "Kids like sweets. You make sure they get this." Mason continued following the cracked sidewalk into the industrial quarter. A shadow moved near one of the buildings. Mason recognized Ray Delgado, a mechanic in his early 30s, short but solidly built with a trimmed black beard. He had grown up rough but in recent years had tried to clean up his life. "Morning, officer," Ray said, his tone cautious. "Cold day to be walking here. You see anyone hanging around these warehouses? Someone tall? Scar on his cheek?" Ray shifted. "Can't say I have," he muttered, then added too quickly, "I keep to myself." Mason stepped closer. "Ray, you know this town. If Doyle's back, it'll mean trouble. If you know anything, now's the time." Ray licked his lips. "I heard talk. A truck came late 2 nights ago. No plates, just parked and unloaded. Didn't see the driver's face, but there was someone watching from the corner. Big guy. Looked mean. Could be him." His eyes flicked nervously. I don't want trouble, officer. You did right, telling me. Keep your doors locked. When Mason returned to the station, Caleb was laughing quietly for the first time, Rex's tail thumping as Hannah coaxed a smile from the boy. Clara Jenkins had dropped by, leaving a basket of pastries. For a fleeting moment, the station felt like a home, then Mason's eyes caught a drawing Caleb had abandoned on the table. This one different, darker. It showed a building with jagged windows, a shadowy figure standing beside it, lines slashed hard across the page. Mason picked it up, his throat tightening. Caleb had seen more than he could yet say, but the truth was bleeding through his pencil. Snow returned that night. Mason drove the quiet streets, Ray Delgado's words stirring an old instinct. He turned toward the industrial quarter. Walter Briggs waited by the chain-link fence, shoulders hunched beneath his parka. Didn't think I'd come out again, did you? He rasped. I figured you'd be here, Mason said. They moved toward the warehouse together. The building loomed with broken windows like hollow eyes. Mason aimed his flashlight across the door frame and found fresh scuff marks in the snow. They're back, Walter muttered. Same patterns from years ago. Late nights, unmarked trucks. Walter pulled his coat tighter. That boy's parents, they spoke to me once. Said they'd seen too much. 2 days later, they were gone. And I saw Doyle watching them that night. His eyes flicked away, guilt flashing. I didn't stop it. Should have known better. Mason laid a hand briefly on his shoulder. You can help make it right now. Back at the station, Hannah had taken the children into one of the unused offices. She sat cross-legged on the rug with Caleb at her side, guiding his hand over colored pencils. Leia lay bundled on a blanket while Rex sprawled near the door. Caleb was drawing again, this time a rough picture of a dark building with a glowing square, a window lit from within. Hannah tilted her head. Is that the place? Caleb's lips pressed tight, but he nodded once. Sergeant Anders stepped in carrying a thermos. He noticed the drawing, paused, then crouched beside the boy. That window, you saw someone there. Caleb hesitated, then whispered, the man with the scar. Anders straightened slowly. Well, that settles it. Doyle's not just a rumor. Later that evening, Mason returned carrying a folder of notes and photographs. He opened it, revealing a grainy surveillance still Anders had pulled from a traffic camera. The picture showed a truck with no plates, and near it the blurry outline of a tall man, his cheek marked by a jagged shadow. Mason placed it beside Caleb's drawing. The likeness was uncanny. Caleb's small hand trembled as he touched the photo. Rex growled softly. Mason crouched in front of the boy. That's him, isn't it? Caleb swallowed, then nodded once. His eyes brimmed, but no tears fell. Mason placed the photo back in the folder and shut it carefully. Thank you. You helped more than you know. The wind cut sharp across Ashton Falls the next morning. Inside the station, Rex paced, restless. His nails clicked against the tile floor, tail low, ears swiveling toward every sound outside. Caleb sat nearby, feeding Leia a bottle under Hannah's supervision, but his eyes kept following the dog. Mason had spent years working alongside K-9 units. He knew when an animal's instincts were shouting. He crouched, resting a hand on Rex's back. The dog's fur bristled, muscles tense as a coiled spring. You've got a trail, don't you? Rex whined low, Mason decided. He strapped on his service belt and clipped a lead to Rex's collar. Hannah looked up quickly. You're taking him out there? If Doyle's moving in the woods, you shouldn't be alone. I won't be. Anders will back me. But Rex has something to show us. Sergeant Anders joined them in the cruiser. You know, I was hoping for a quiet winter. Mason's eyes stayed on the snowy road. Sometimes the dog's the only one paying attention. They reached the edge of the forest where old logging trails cut through pines. Rex leapt from the cruiser, nose to the ground immediately. His breath steamed in the cold as he pulled forward. Half an hour in, Rex froze, head high, body rigid. Mason raised a hand to stop Anders. Ahead, half buried under snow and bramble, stood a corrugated metal door set into a rise of earth. A ventilation shaft jutted from the mound. The ground bore faint tire tracks, fresh despite the snowfall. Anders swore under his breath. They've got a bunker out here. Mason studied the door. A heavy padlock hung from its latch, but the chain was new. He crouched, brushing snow away. They're using this place as storage. Maybe more. Rex growled low, hackles up. A rustle came from the treeline. Mason and Anders spun, weapons drawn. A figure stumbled into view, hands raised. He was thin, gaunt, with a patchy beard. Earl Denton, a drifter known for odd jobs. Don't shoot. I'm not with them. I just saw trucks. His voice was raspy. You've been here before. Earl nodded quickly. I come for scrap sometimes. Saw big men unloading crates. One had a scar on his face. Told me to clear out or I'd end up in the snow for good. Go back to town, Earl. Keep your mouth shut. If you see Doyle again, you tell me first. Earl hurried off, his figure swallowed by trees. Mason turned back to the bunker. We need a warrant and backup. But now we know where to look. Back at the station that evening, Caleb looked up as Mason returned. Rex trotted straight to him, brushing against his knee. Mason crouched before Caleb. We found something in the woods. A place where Doyle's been hiding things. You helped us get there. Caleb blinked, then reached for Rex, clutching his fur. Mason put a hand on his shoulder, firm. We'll keep you safe. That's a promise. By the following morning, word of activity near the woods was circling through Ashton Falls. Mason sat at his desk, pen scratching across forms. Sergeant Anders leaned against the filing cabinet. Judge will sign it by noon. But you know Doyle won't sit and wait. That's why we'll be there first. A knock sounded at the station door. Anders answered, letting in District Attorney Marcus Hale, a lean figure in his early 50s with silver hair combed neatly. Mason, I've reviewed your report. You'll get your warrant, but if Doyle is as dangerous as Briggs claims, you'll need this handled clean. We're not waiting until he vanishes again. We have the location. We move tonight. By late afternoon, reinforcements gathered. Among them was Officer Dana Ruiz, a tall woman in her 30s with cropped black hair and a scar along her jawline. Her reputation was sharp, protective of her colleagues. She checked her rifle, nodded once to Mason, and said simply, I'm in. Hannah stayed behind, watching Caleb and Leia. She whispered to Mason before he left, be careful. Those kids already lost once. They can't lose again. Night draped the woods in shadows. Snow fell in a fine mist. Rex moved with them, low and alert. At the clearing, the bunker's outline rose. A faint glow leaked from the ventilation shaft. Voices drifted on the wind. Mason raised a hand, signaling silence. Anders moved to the left flank, Dana to the right. Mason crept closer. Rex stiffened, ears forward, a growl rumbling deep in his chest, then the door of the bunker screeched open. A man stepped out, tall and heavy-set with a scar slicing down his cheek like a jagged brand. Doyle. His eyes scanned the treeline with suspicion. Mason stepped forward. Doyle. Doyle's head snapped toward the sound, his hand reaching instinctively toward his coat. Before he could draw, Rex barked loud, sharp. From the shadows, Anders and Dana moved in, weapons trained. Hands up. Anders barked. Now. Doyle's eyes flicked to the woods, calculating escape. But the circle was already closing. Dana's stance was unwavering. Doyle snarled, the scar on his face twisting, but he raised his hands slowly. Mason stepped closer, his hazel eyes locked on Doyle's. It's over. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. Rex's growl faded only when Mason touched his collar. The night was still. For the first time, light had broken through the shadows of Ashton Falls. The snow muffled every sound as Doyle was taken away, but the open bunker behind him breathed secrets into the night. The team descended carefully, flashlights sweeping over rusted steps and concrete walls. Inside, wooden crates were stacked in rows. Anders pried one open. Inside lay rows of stolen electronics. Another box revealed handguns, but in the far corner, Mason's light fell on something different, a small alcove with 2 bedrolls, a child's shoe, and a broken locket with a faded picture. His chest tightened. These were the remnants of Caleb and Leia's parents. Dana crouched, lifting the locket gently. They lived here, didn't they? Mason nodded, grief pressing into his ribs. He pocketed the locket, determined to give it to Caleb. Rex whined, nudging toward the bed rolls. Mason rubbed his head. I see it, boy. I see it. Back at the station, dawn painted the horizon. Hannah had stayed through the night. When Mason returned, she looked up immediately. He handed her the locket. She opened it, saw the blurred image of a smiling woman, and her eyes filled. Mason crouched beside Caleb and touched his shoulder lightly. The boy stirred, blinking. Mason placed the locket in his palm. This was your mother's. Caleb clutched it with both hands, tears slipping silent down his face. Rex nudged his knee, and the boy leaned into the dog's fur. Later that day, the town gathered in the hall. District Attorney Hale presented the evidence seized. Doyle's crimes were laid bare, his smuggling ring dismantled. Clara Jenkins provided hot rolls for the officers. Walter Briggs stood in the back, his lined face pale but relieved. For the first time in years, Ashton Falls felt the weight of fear lift. That evening, Mason found Caleb sitting on the steps outside. The locket still clenched in his hand. Hannah sat beside him. Rex lay at their feet. Mason lowered himself onto the step. You've been through a lot. But you're not alone now. You have Hannah. You have me. And you have Rex. Caleb looked up, his eyes wide, still shadowed, but no longer empty. Slowly, he nodded. The weeks that followed brought slow healing. Papers were filed, custody arrangements considered. Hannah volunteered to take the children in temporarily, her small apartment filling with warmth from their presence. Caleb began to smile more often, his drawings turning from shadows to sunlit houses with smoke curling gently upward. Leia thrived in Hannah's care. Rex became the constant guardian of their new life. Spring eventually touched Ashton Falls, melting the snow into rushing streams. On one clear morning, Mason walked to Hannah's home carrying a small carved wooden toy, a horse he had whittled himself. He found Caleb in the yard tossing a stick for Rex, Leia gurgling in her pram under the porch, and Hannah kneeling in the garden, auburn hair lit like copper in the sun. For the first time in years, Mason felt the ache in his chest ease. He realized that justice was not only about courtrooms and warrants. Sometimes it was about holding together the broken pieces of a family until they could grow again. That evening, as twilight spread across the valley, Hannah gathered the children inside. Mason lingered by the door, watching the glow spill from the windows, the laughter soft and real. He whispered to himself, not just safe. Home. And Rex, standing sentinel by his side, seemed to agree, tail wagging against the quiet. Sometimes the smallest act, a warm bowl of soup, a loyal dog refusing to leave, a stranger choosing to stop, becomes the spark that changes a life forever. What happened in Ashton Falls was more than justice served. It was a reminder that God often works his quiet miracles through ordinary people willing to care, protect, and stay when others walk away. In our daily lives, we all pass by alleys of silence, people carrying burdens we cannot see. Perhaps the true miracle is when we pause, open our eyes, and decide not to turn away. That is how love is shown, how families are rebuilt, and how hope survives even the coldest winters. May God bless everyone watching this story. May He guide your steps, protect your families, and remind you that even in the darkest nights, His light is never far.